As I mentioned earlier, this isn't just novels. Poetry holds a really special place in our society, and it's growing again in popularity as people discover its powers. And we have a second wonderful poet with us this evening. I met him 2 years ago, I guess, at a reading of his, and was really moved by his poetry as well. Scott Thomas Outler is a poet, essayist, editor, and radio host living in the suburbs outside of Atlanta, Georgia. He has been a weekly contributor to the Dissident Voice Sunday Poetry page since the summer of 2014. And during that period of time, his work has appeared in more than 300 literary venues around the world. His poetry has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net, and selections have been translated into Afrikaans, Albanian, Dutch, French, Italian, Persian, and Serbian. His most recent book, Abstract Visions of Light, was released in 2018 through Alan Buddha Press. Links to all his published poetry, fiction, essays, interviews, reviews, live events, and books can be found at 17numa.com. That's 17numa.com. The book he will be reading from is Abstract Visions of Light. Depending on time, perhaps also a poem from his forthcoming book of Sand and Sugar. Please welcome Scott.
All right, thank you, Beth, for inviting me here tonight. Peach and the Pork Chop for hosting the event. A lot of fun so far. Enjoyed the food. And just a little background information. I live in Lilburn, Georgia. 38 years old. Born and raised here in Georgia. And grew up wanting to be a baseball player. Played through high school at Parkview. And after I didn't get drafted coming out of high school, realized I needed to pick a new career path, and that took a few years. I guess I'd be a career counselor's worst nightmare because Major League Baseball didn't quite work out, and so I thought I'll try to be a poet. But, much better odds at that, right? So that would give them a heart attack, I'm sure. So it took a few years searching for a new identity after high school, and I guess writing, I realized in my blood a little bit because my grandfather, a man named Jesse Outler, was the writer and sports editor for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for about 30 years. I never realized what that meant because he retired back before I had finished elementary school, I think. So it wasn't until later years that I realized the significance of that position he had, and how much fun it must have been, and how much work that must have been. So I started writing, trying to develop my craft for the next decade or so, and always knew that I was going to try and publish, but hadn't really put my efforts and focus into that until around 2013. My father became ill, and by the time they diagnosed it, it was cancer in his lungs. It metastasized into his liver and some areas of his bone. So the next 6 months from that diagnosis were a hard time for him and my family until he passed away in February of 2014. And at that point, I became very detached in one sense from many things of life, but also that wave of there's nothing left to lose sort of energy came over me. So I decided it was time to start trying to make something of myself and try to get published, which, as Beth mentioned, I had my first publication in Dissident Voice, which is a cultural newsletter up out of Canada, done by a woman named Angie Tibbs, who's the editor there. And I'll always be eternally grateful for her because she gave my first poem a home, and I've since been publishing there weekly ever since on the Sunday poetry page they have there. And I also have a bit of an addictive personality, so from that point on, I put all my energy into trying to learn about the independent press and the small press and all the different poetry cliques and circles and groups that there are out there. And I've just been publishing ever since. So that's also led to 5 collections of poetry since 2014, and this is my most recent, called Abstract Visions of Light by Alien Buddha Press. Red Fox and Jay Minor are the owners there, and the front cover is an abstract painting by Red Fox, Also has a section in here of photography that he took while hitchhiking in Slab City, California a couple of years ago. Anyone that's seen the movie Into the Wild, there's a part in the movie about Slab City. So there's some black and white photography in here. And I thought I'd start off, been talking about Dissident Voice, with a piece that originally appeared there. This one's called Golden Oldies, Still Shimmer and Shine. All I want is the truth, it has been said a time or two. But sometimes in life we get fed a steady stream of lies. So it's no surprise, and three open eyes can always see straight through such deception right from the start. All you need is love. A certain song once harmonized through melodic la la la. But sometimes it simply is not so, and amore can be reduced to ash quite fast, if in fact only lust provides the core from which it is born. I am the walrus, I am the bloodhound, I am the lucid dream awakened, I am the vinyl record playing. Suspend the black circle as wisdom from the past manifest in the present to clear our path toward the future. Ancient proverbs taste like promises of righteous revolution on the tips of wanton tongues that have developed a taste for renaissance and ascension. It will all, one day, be dust in the wind, no doubt, but that should never stop us now from the screams and shouts that rock and roll our heavy metal momentum toward dance hall bliss, imbibed in double doses and imbued with the graceful glory of a starlit symphonic concert. We are the cosmos, we are the night owl, we are the seat of the soul, we are the story as it unfolds. Cuckoo, cuckoo.
All right. Nice job.
All right, these next couple are traveling poems. A couple of the highlights of my life actually have happened in the last year and a half, where I've had the opportunity to attend some friends' book launches. And this was back in the end of 2017. A UK poet named Matt Dugan was releasing his book, and he invited another friend of mine, Keith Brocker, a poet up in York, Pennsylvania, and myself over to the Poetry Cafe in London to read with him. So this is a little snapshot of that event. It's called Across the Pond. London lights flash neon blue, emblazoned with the Phoenix and Piccadilly Circus, where energy is manic and creativity burns straight through the heart of a city without fog, if only for one night. Every language becomes crystal clear in a melting pot where mussels are served with fish, chips, wine, wine, wine that flows along the River Thames with accents from regions both near and far, if only for one night. Voices from the crowd surface upon the stage of the Poetry Cafe, where society converges around the comforting caress of art that slips carefully off the tips of tongues, teasing the promise of renaissance in a culture renewed, if only for one night. Thank you. And then this is another traveling poem at a book launch up in Toronto. Friend Philip Elliott, who's the editor and founder of a magazine called Into the Void, and he invited my friend Keith and I up there. Keith is also the poetry editor of Into the Void, so we were able to read it that as well. This one is from the night before, memories of it, called Gained in Translation. Suit and tie, bluesy jazz burns bone deep from center stage in Toronto. There is no use trying to talk or get a word in edgewise in this deafening din of fire and light. The music speaks a language of its own with an essence that always matters most. The owner behind the bar reminds me of a woman from Albania that used to lie, "I love you," every evening before we fell asleep. Te dua shume. The cocktail she brings to our flimsy table reminds me that true love is still just one sip away if you drink deeply of life without a chaser. There will be poetry tomorrow. There will be a stage of our own. There will be a scene set in motion. But for the moment, all the movement is humming from a guitar that learned how to weep with the power of gentle chaos. And Beth had also mentioned that my next book coming out later this year, I just finished the manuscript on it. It's called Of Sand and Sugar, and it sort of ties into one of the lines from that last poem. It's about a string of heartbreaks over the last few years, and a friend of mine, a poet over in Italy named Mihaila Melnick, has served as my quasi-therapist over those years, a true friend helping me through that process. And we always send each other poems back and forth, and she sent me this one not too long ago, and after I read it I said, my God, you've got to let me use that as the epilogue for this book because it captures the theme and energy perfectly. And she said, well, I should hope so. I wrote it about you. But I had suspicions. But so I told her I would read this tonight. It's called Poet Mahdi, which means doomed poet. A rose of women, the petals he collects. He writes their names, and each has her own scent. Their twisted roots, tattered stems between white lines of powdery ice he tries in vain to heal. The outer space is but a mere reality, and down on earth he bleeds. He lays them on bed sheets made up on paper with blood instead of ink. Wide open eyes, grand angle sight to entice, lure, and kill. A reflex, woman, beast. In gloomy nights, the fire rebirths his ashen heart, again for them to feast.
Beautiful. You can tell her we like it too.
Thank you very much. And this ties right into this next poem, going back to Abstract Visions of Light, because Mihaila translated it into Italian, and it was published in Setu magazine last year, and it also serves as the opening poem of this book, called Transcending Definitions. Art is not an institution. It is an inner fire born out of those whose eyes pierce deeply into hidden, burning beauty. Art is not a class taught by academia. It is a holy vibration pulsing through the veins of those who sense the truth of this world's perfect purity. Art is not a transaction. It is a soulful expression that has no choice but to be released as a reflection of the source. Art is not a sales pitch. It is an intense emotion coupled with a vision of crystalline transcendence that ruptures open new dimensions. Art is not yet ready for the grave. It is a raging protest against the mortal flesh that sings the sweetest melody about overcoming life's suffering. There's a line in there, art is not a sales pitch, but of course all of us here tonight do have books that are available. We do have to eat and pay for our meals here tonight. And so that was the opening piece from this book, and I'll finish with the one that ends it. I did want to mention really quickly, though, I host a radio show on Blog Talk podcast called Songs of Salah. It's every Monday night, so I'm always looking for artists and writers who would like to come on the show. So anyone who wants to come on, do an interview, and promote your work, I'll be more than happy to have y'all on. 17numa.com is my website, or just chat after the show. Doing an interview with the publishers from this book tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. So this is a piece called Trembling Toward the Sun. How much difference and distance... Let me start over. How much distance and difference is there between a mountain and a molehill? And how far are you determined to climb to ensure your problems amount to blessings in the end? How tenacious is your will to peace? How deep is your reservoir of faith? When you weep with me, do so not out of sorrow, but exultation, and know that even in our suffering there shines a light of salvation. How many skeletons are there living in your closet that rattle bones when you can't sleep at night? And how tired are the dragons that guard the secrets hiding in the shadows that haunt your soul? How dedicated is your tongue to truth? How strong is your resolve in the fire? When you dance with me, do so not in half steps, but full measure, and know that every movement guides us closer to the stars. How many millstones hang around your neck as you drag your cross from earth to sea to sky? And how many psalms do you recite in darkness as a prayer for healing to arrive with dawn? How inspired is your passion? How embedded is your urge to ascend? When you sing with me, do so not in low key but high spirits. And know that this language of lyrics is born of revival. Thanks.
Beautiful.